Okay, so most of you guys are able to spend time in Unity working a little bit with a level editor, figuring out how to use the tools that are built in, placing objects, simple stuff. This is not really enough to make a game, however, so we're going to spend a little bit of time today working with Playmaker, and we're also going to use Playmaker to create some simple ways that you can interact with your game. Because as it stands right now, if nothing else, your games are pretty much only able to let the player run around. There's not really a way for them to interact with objects in the world or anything like that. So before we get into Playmaker, I kind of want to talk a little bit about what Playmaker is and how it works. And to that, it kind of means we have to talk about states. Why are we talking about states? Well, Playmaker works with exclusively states. And Playmaker is all about states. That's like how they make their money. They sell you a tool, and the tool, what it does, it lets you make states and lets you interact with them. So what is a state? Well, I have a light switch up here. And a state is really just a way to describe what an object is doing or how it's behaving right now. So a light switch, right? There are two states to the light switch. What are those two states?
On and off.
On and off, right? Pretty simple stuff. It's kind of pretty obvious as to when a light is either on or off, because right now the lights are off and you can turn them on again. So a couple other examples. There are real-world examples of objects in the world that have more than two states, like a stoplight, for instance. Right? How many states are in a stoplight?
Three.
Yeah. How do you know that?
Because there's 3 lights.
3 lights, sure. It can be in one of those 3 states. Pretty simple. So for a game, though, let's take a look at one of these guys. This thing is also states. How many states does this vending machine have? Like this specific, the kind of crazy ones that have the little thing that grabs it and then never delivers it properly to the end. How many states?
Is every selection also counted as a state?
Selection? You mean every one of these Coke bottles? No. Imagine there's one giant Coke bottle in there.
2.
2? What are the 2 states?
Not working and working.
That's a good way to put it. But let's talk about what happens when you walk up to one of these things and you try to put money in it, right? What are some more states that you could say this thing has?
Taking the money.
Taking money? Okay, what does that actually mean? What is the machine doing when it's taking money?
It's accepting.
Well, the feeder takes in the cash, something records the accepting the payment.
Accepting payment.
How much credit you have.
Okay, so there is that state where you put in some amount of money. It's like, cool, let me figure out if this is enough money, right? Then what happens?
Then you have to make a selection and then...
Well, wait, before you get to that, there's 2 things that can happen when you put in money,
Oh,
right?
yeah, it can reject the bill.
Okay, there's 3 things that can happen when you put in money. It can reject the bill because you're trying to use some counterfeit money or some kind of Canadian currency.
Or it's just being picky.
Okay, so it's there's at least it either accepts the money that you put in or it doesn't. Let's say that's the first thing that happens. Okay, you put in a dollar bill and it's like, nah, this dollar bill is jank. I don't really want it. Go ahead and take it back. But let's say okay, it accepts the money. It's like, cool, this is valid currency. Then what happens?
Well, it shows you your credit.
Okay.
But then you have to make a
selection.
Does it? What if I put in a nickel?
It deems
Well,
if you have enough or not enough.
Right, that's the other state that it goes into. It's like, first, I figured out that your money that you put in is good. Now, I'm still waiting on more money, or you have enough money. It's one of those 2 states, right? It can either go to the point where it's like, hey, you need to put in more money, or go ahead and make your selection, right? Those are 2 more states that it can go in. And remember, before that, it first had to make sure that the money was valid, right? Okay, then what can happen?
Choose what you want to drink.
Or
Choose what you want to drink, or...
if it's out, it'll say make another selection.
Okay, so you can make a selection. What if I want my money back?
Or you can cancel.
Okay, and then what happens? What state does it go into if you cancel?
Steal money state.
Steal money state. No. It'll give you back your money, and then what? goes back to the first state
Yeah.
where it's accepting money, right? Okay, there's a lot of states in here, right? So let's say it accepts your money, you put in enough money, and you want to make a selection. Let's say you make a selection. What happens? You actually said it. What happens if you make a selection for an object that doesn't, there's not enough in there? Like you want,
It'll ask for more.
it'll ask for, well, if there's a Coke bottle, like vanilla Coke that you really want, and it's not in there.
Well,
It
then
tells
it's,
you that
yeah, make a
it's,
new selection.
not there.
Right, and then what happens?
Make a different selection.
Make another selection, right? So okay, so you make a selection. You get your Mountain Dew out. Then what happens?
Once you've taken your payment, it'll either give you change if you need it, or it'll just go back to the default state.
Yes, so there's a little bit of nuance. So our vending machines at Blizzard work a little differently. If you make a selection, and let's say for some reason the machine malfunctions, and it figures out that it didn't actually end up giving you the drink because the drink like fell through, or it couldn't grab the drink because that happens a lot. What actually happens then?
Will it refund you?
Yeah, it'll refund you. So it'll go back and be like, hey, make another selection, or sometimes it'll take your money and be like, cool, thanks for the purchase. Otherwise, it'll deliver you your Coke or your Mountain Dew, and then it goes back to the beginning, right? Waiting for the next purchase, right? So it's kind of complicated. Like, there's actually a lot of different pieces. There's actually way more states than that, even. Like, each of the things we talked about was a really broad level. Like, there are things like, hey, when the machine is first plugged in, what happens? What states are it in? What if a guy is opening up and restocking? What states are it in, right? Like, the machine's not actually letting you vend stuff, right? There's also states for, like, am I using a credit card, or am I actually using real change? Do I need to dispense change to you, right? Did you put in too much money? Does that make sense? Like, so the states are a way for you to think about an object in the real world, or these are perfect for video games too, because games are also a collection of different states. Take any kind of game that you played recently. Let's take a Final Fantasy game, for instance. There are states, right after you start up the game, the first thing you are is in a state. You're in a state of press a button to go into the game. You're in a menu. That's a state. You press a button to get into the game. Now you're in a game. That's another state. What happens if you get into like a random encounter in an RPG? Maybe you're walking around in the world. Walking around in the world is one state. And get into a random encounter, that's another state, right? What happens if, like, let's take one character from like Skyrim or like Fallout, right? If you guys ever played like using the VAT system or something,
Yeah.
the way combat works, like your character has states. He's either alive or dead. He's either like shooting his weapons or waiting to pick what weapons he should fire, right? Think about all the different ways you can describe a game using states, right? So states are really, they're kind of simple, but they're really powerful. They're ways that you can describe. And the reason why they're powerful is it lets you break up and describe how something works in very, very simple terms, right? A vending machine is actually kind of complicated, but each individual state is not very complicated. Like, you could probably figure out, like, oh, the state for whether it has enough money or not, that's pretty simple. But where it gets kind of complicated is when all the states interact with one another. Because what happens if in a vending machine, right, if it decides to just screw up the order of those states and how it goes from one state to another? What happens if it dispenses the product first and then asks for money?
You just
Right?
got a freebie.
Yeah, you got a freebie. Well, that's weird, but that simple change in the order of how the states go is super important. And that order of how the states interact with one another is called a state machine. This whole thing is a state machine. A state machine is just all the states that describe an object and how it goes from one state to another. Okay? Does that make sense? Like how it goes from one state to another? Like this is the state machine for a light switch, right? There are two states, on and off. When you're on, you can go and turn off, go to the off state, right? This state machine describes the states as well as how you go from one state to another. Right? So how you go from one state to another, we're going to call them transitions. All right? These are transitions from going on to off. And what do I actually physically do to go from on to off?
Flip the switch.
I turn the switch off. It's specific. Like, it's not just flipping a switch. It's actually, I'm putting it into the off position, right? And then if I want to turn it on, I turn it on again. This is important, though. Like, it might seem really simple. Like, duh, it's a light switch. I get how light switches work. You're insulting me. The key is that these are one-way interactions, right? When your light switch is on, the only thing you can do is turn it off. You can't turn a light switch that's on again, right? Just like the light switch is off right now. If I ask someone to go ahead and turn the lights off, what do? Walk up to it, they can't do anything. The lights are already off, right? This example is actually seems pretty simple, and in most cases it is, but we can talk a little bit more about something like a stoplight, right? What does the state machine for this actually look like?
It's a pre-programmed sequence. Green to
Well, it
Yeah.
cycles through,
It cycles through.
but it also has to be activated because it'll stay green, and then if someone's at like on the sensor, then it triggers the light to change.
Yeah, let's talk about the simple case where it's just a light switch.
And then it would be on like a timer, so it would be on green for a certain amount of time, and then it would cycle to yellow and then red.
Let's say these are like any of the Irvine lights. So you're starting at red. You drive up to a stoplight and the light is red. What happens? Where does it go?
It'll go to green after a time, and then green will eventually go to yellow and then back to red.
Okay, so I'm going to draw this. It goes to yellow. What causes it to go from green to yellow?
The timer.
Timer. And sorry, what causes it to go from red to green?
Timer again.
Yeah, or like the fates. It seems like sometimes it's like an actual like plate that detects your car. Other times I swear like it doesn't even realize I'm there. Yeah, there's either like a timer. We'll just say it's a timer. A
Yeah.
simple stoplight. These all work based on time. Let's say it turns red to green based on after 10 seconds, right? And then turns from green to yellow after 5 seconds. And how does it go from yellow to red?
You know, like in
So,
2 seconds.
2 seconds, yeah.
There's not enough time to go through yellow.
Okay.
Oh, there's always time to get through yellow.
We're talking going the speed limit, not speed
That
limit, right?
yellow is just an option. It's not a requirement, right? You don't have to like. It's a challenge, really.
Yellow is
it's a
speed for your
challenge.
life or stop.
Yeah,
Nobody listens
it's
to
like
yellow.
it's like, hey man, how fast do you think you can go? I dare you. So that's the state machine for a stoplight, right? Does this make sense, right? Going from red to green. Notice the way the arrows are, though. They're a little different. They're not like as simple as like the light switch. State machines can be arbitrarily complex as you want them to be. There's nothing saying that you can't go from red to yellow and yellow to red again. Nothing really saying that. It just forever goes red, yellow, red, yellow, red, yellow.
I've seen a traffic light go from green to red because it
Seems
went
dangerous.
green and then a train was coming. So
Oh,
instead of
crazy.
switching to yellow, it went straight to red because everyone was supposed to stop because
Okay.
here comes the train.
I like that. That means that there's yet another, there's nothing that says you can't have this. Another transition from green to red, which is train.
Train and or
OMG.
like cops or sirens.
There's nothing stopping you from going from red to yellow or red to red again. We could do that. I've seen a stoplight go from red to red.
How do you know it's going from?
Because there's a stoplight out by Blizzard, which goes onto the highway. And you know how stoplights normally work when you're making a left turn? You go like, oh, eventually I'll get my turn,
Yeah.
and I'll be able to make a left. And because all these opposing cars are going, then they stop. Then these opposing cars go, then they stop. And my turn is in there somewhere. And the way that stoplight works is no, these guys go again, then the opposing traffic goes again, and does that twice before it actually lets you go into the left lane.
Then wait, wouldn't there be a separate state of black so that you would know?
No, it's just red, and some people run that. So red, it might have a timer, but it might also say like, hey, just stay on red. You don't have to actually go anywhere.
It's timer and or conditions, I guess you could put it.
Mhm. Yeah, a timer is a condition. That's the thing. Actually, there are other conditions. I'm sure you guys have hit stoplights where you come up to a red and you feel like it turns green right away because it detects that your car is there. Sometimes it's based on a timer. Sometimes it's based on knowing that the car is there.
And you can speed up the timer and use with someone's on the walk.
Yeah.
They can speed the timer up.
Okay. Let's talk a little bit about the vending machine. like I said, vending machines are kind of complex. There are a lot of states to a vending machine. And what's crazy is actually the interactions between those states can actually get complex. One of my very first programming interview questions was, make me a state machine for a vending machine. I was like, oh, that's simple. But it wasn't. It actually is. When you actually get down and think about a vending machine and try to design how it works from one state to another, it actually can get pretty complex. So keep this in mind that state machines can be really simple, or they can get to something that actually defines a lot of different behaviors. Even for something that's simple as a vending machine. Like, the fact is, there are a lot of parts to it, and you can define them the same way you define a stoplight, though. And this is what Playmaker is pretty much about. It allows you to define states, and it allows you to define the transitions between them, just like making a stoplight or a light switch. Or, this might be a good example. Instead of a vending machine for a game, maybe a state machine like this would represent, like, I don't know, like a Diablo-style game, right? There are different ways that you can describe a game. And a game isn't made up of just one state machine. A game actually has hundreds of different small little state machines everywhere. Like ones for like a monster in Diablo, right? Like the AI in games, a lot of times is defined by a state machine. What is the AI doing? Like if we take a look at any guard in any video game ever, they have like a state where they're patrolling, and a state where they're chasing you, or a state where they're attacking you, right? There's different states, and the AI can be really well described by using a state machine. Okay. All right. So any questions on state machines? Pretty clear, like how they are. Like state machines is states and how they transition from one to another, right? So this is what Playmaker state machine looks like. Looks pretty similar to like the first slide, right? There are two states. This is a light switch that we're going to be making like right after this slide in Playmaker. There are two states in this. One state is on, another state is off. And see how the lines are connecting to one another? That defines the state machine. This start here is not a state. It actually just tells you which is your first state that you want to be. Right? Do you want your light to be on by default or off by default? Okay. So we're going to be using this to make our behavior. All right, questions? Playmaker. Okay.